Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and as you know, I have recently made a video where I reacted to the official announcement and game trailer about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. And as you know, being a fan of Warhorse Studios and their original game Kingdom Come Deliverance, about which I made already a lot of content on this channel a few years ago, I was so, and I'm still so excited about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. But as with anything, whenever you Google Kingdom Come Deliverance, as it happened when the first game came out, once again with the second one, we see that there are people that are specifically attacking the game, saying that it's pushing some sort of white supremacist ideology, saying that the game should be more inclusive and there should be more representation. And as always, this creates factions of people that take their positions and attack the other without being ready to have discourse, intelligent conversation, and actually look at things from a real historical perspective. So as always with this channel, I'm trying to give you a perspective that instead tries to answer questions that should be addressed from an academic standpoint only, without bringing in the politics. So, should Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 be inclusive? Should it have representation? And most importantly, should the first iteration, Kingdom Come Deliverance, have been more inclusive in the first place? Now, as you know, on this channel, the first thing that I'm interested in is historical accuracy, and I'm always in favor of having shows that show us people of color, so whether it be more Asians, whether it be Africans. If you set a video game or a movie in an environment within a specific time frame and period that indeed included these people, and even more so, perhaps it's specifically about these cultures and history, I say absolutely, I enjoy real representation in history. The question is very specific. Were there black people in Bohemia in the early 15th century? I think in order to respond to this in the most professional way possible, we need to identify a few factors. Factor number one, what do we mean exactly by diversity? Because you see, if you were to go into one of the major cities in that specific area in Europe, you would have most likely run into an Italian, a French, a German, a Slavic person, of course a Czech person, a Jew. And therefore, from that standpoint, is it diverse? Yes, but I don't think that that's the sort of diversity that specific articles are expecting, which is already quite telling in of itself. So if what you're asking is, we want African people to be represented, we want Asian people to be represented, we want Middle Eastern, we want LGBTQ members to be represented, we also want strong empowered women to be represented, which you will see it's all of these, then yes, there is going to be a problem, because then you're going to break historical accuracy in the majority of these cases, although there might still be a little space depending on what cities they choose. If the game, in some aspects similarly to the first, takes place in what could be considered small rural areas, then the level of homogeny of said areas would have been extremely high, in the sense that medieval Czech Republic, or in the Kingdom of Bohemia, one type of colonization, and that's the word they usually use, a specific type of colonization that they did was divided, when they were building new settlements, was divided in two different categories. There was internal colonization and external colonization. When we talk about internal colonization, we are talking about actual Czech people that group together, move as colonizers, and build a new settlement, which would be the beginning of a lot of towns and rural areas. So if in the game you go through one of these villages that come from internal colonization, the level of homogeny would be basically absolute. You would only see Czech people, because what would a, say, trader, merchant, or warrior from Africa or from Asia do in such a small little village? There would be no financial interests whatsoever. So it would have to be an extremely rare case that would be very difficult to document, because we have no proof of anything like it. When it comes to external colonization, something that happened absolutely in the medieval period, it would be a very similar process, but instead of being Czech people, it would be Germans. So once again, if you happen to go into one of these settlements, then yes, you wouldn't see Czech people as much, you would mostly see Germans, but then again, not exactly the type of diversity that I think people that are complaining or attacking the studio are expecting. However, if we are talking about a major center, a massive city in comparison, for example Prague, then there are a few aspects that need to be taken into consideration, and this works for a lot of different cities in the medieval period. For instance, university. The presence of a specific center for advanced studies was a magnet towards other cultures and other countries. So this is why, for example, the University of Prague, which was absolutely active in the medieval period, and it was built sort of in the basis of the one in Paris, did attract people from lots of different areas in Europe. And therefore, if you go into a center like this, then it would be more cosmopolitan. Well, not cosmopolitan compared to the modern time, but definitely more cosmopolitan than a little village in the rural area in Czech Republic. Similarly, another aspect that needs to be taken into consideration is if said city is a commercial hub, because commercial hubs or major trade centers would attract traders and sometimes even mercenaries looking for hire. Therefore, if your game at any point, or even your movie, takes place in one of these major hubs in Europe, then a higher level, still very low compared to the modern period, but a higher level of cosmopolitanism could be expected. With that being said, one of the reasons, and this is kind of the second aspect that we need to take into consideration that is very important when it comes to, well, how cosmopolitan a major trading center would be, is in fact the geographic position. And that is one of the things that I'm noticing, that whenever I watch videos on YouTube about this, I hear people saying, well, Czech Republic is in Eastern Europe and therefore it's almost connected to Asia, so obviously there would have been Asians there. Well, hold on a minute. First, oh goodness gracious, geography. First of all, Czech Republic is in Central Europe. Central Europe. It is in fact one of the most central countries within Europe. So already I see a big problem. Geography, you've got to know geography before you can talk about this. European geography in this case. Secondly, the most cosmopolitan cities in medieval Europe would have been maritime cities, or cities that were built next to major rivers, because water was an important connector. Therefore, you cannot compare or expect the same level of cosmopolitanism between, say, Alexandria, which we know was extremely cosmopolitan, and, say, Paris, which instead was, rather than being a trade center, was more of a political and cultural center in the medieval period. Also, when it comes to percentages of, say, black people and people of color in general, when it comes to Europe, even today, if you Google it, you will come across a map like this one. Now, this map does need to be taken with a pinch of salt, in the sense that it does give an idea on the fact that black people are, even today, a minority in Europe, with France first and also the United Kingdom being areas with a higher density compared to, say, for example, Eastern Europe in this case, and Central Europe, which are the lowest. But the reason why I'm telling you that this map still should be taken with a grain of salt is the fact that it only indicates people who are foreigners. Within these percentages, we are not considering people that perhaps have been in these countries for, say, 3 generations. Not to mention that the activity of some important commercial hubs and trade centers in the medieval period would have been different to the way these areas and these cities act today. So it's not always one-to-one, and we shouldn't look at history as a complete continuum, and in fact we should consider it as an ever-changing and shifting situation. But when it comes to, once again, Central Europe, it would have been extremely less cosmopolitan than, say, Spain in the medieval period. So if you do set a video game in medieval Spain with, for example, the Moors and other invasions, then, you know, the level of cosmopolitanism of those cities would be on a completely different scale. But Central Europe, not famous for it. So that's why I'm saying very much will depend what is the main city, because if it is a trade center, then you could absolutely see, if they decide to put the occasional foreigner in there, they could absolutely do it, as long as they don't over spam it though, because then it would be historically inaccurate. Still, the majority of people should be white, because that's how it was. It's the medieval period we're talking about. So when we look at art, which is also an interesting indicator, we do see the occasional Mongolian, for example. I mean, remember that there were quite a few battles between the Hungarians and the Mongol horde and Poland, and therefore there were some establishments that are not too far away from where the game is set. So just like in art, medieval art, we see the occasional Mongolian in there. We could see an occasional Mongolian in game, and we could indeed see an occasional trader in a major city, but it should remain a rarity. And if what these people that are complaining in the articles instead want to see a lot of black kings and queens and knights and pages for a very inclusive society, then wrong place, wrong setting, that would not be historically accurate at all. The date when this game is set is also very important. They did say that about 10 years have passed from the early game, so if this is still before the Hussite Wars, then there still would be a very strong level of homogeneity when it comes to, for example, the religious practices of the area. So everyone, the majority of people, should be Catholic, whereas if we go further forward in time, depending on when they set it, then there could be a difference because of specific historical occurrence that will change the shape of the societal matrix, if you will. Still, taking into consideration the fact that for this studio historical accuracy is the most important fact, then even if you do represent a few people that are foreigners, then do keep in mind that medieval Europe wasn't exactly the most tolerant place to be for these people, and depending who you're representing and who you're running into and the type of people you would see, this could create scenarios that then the very people that want the diversity might not be comfortable with. We see, for example, in the forums on Steam that someone is complaining about Kingdom Come Deliverance and they read, "Lack of diversity and LGBT inclusion. As a member of the LGBT community, my identity and the way I express myself in video games is very important." Cool. "I noticed a severe lack of diversity and inclusion of POC and LGBT people in this game. Instead, it's forcing you to play as a cis white male, reinforcing the idea that whiteness, white ethno state, is somehow a good thing and thereby severely damaging minorities and other marginalized groups. Are devs planning on addressing this, or are they ignoring LGBT voices?" Well, I'd like to respond to this because I think the position here is absolutely political and also nonsensical, in the sense that even though I can sympathize with any struggle that you definitely have had or are experiencing in your life, I'm not downplaying those, but what we're talking about, what you accuse of being a white supremacist ethno-state, is indeed a realistic representation. I think they did a good job in the first video game, mostly because, as I say, the majority of the game was set in rural areas, and I've already expressed that. But if you do want to have LGBT, so you want to see a gay person or a lesbian represented in this game while maintaining historical accuracy, because that needs to be maintained, then the only way that could logically happen is if you run into a character that in fact has to keep his sexuality secret. So if you're okay with that, and that's how they choose to represent it, I wouldn't see anything wrong with it, in the sense that of course, people who were same-sex attracted existed in the medieval period, but they were persecuted. So if what you want is instead a representation of, oh yeah, there are gay people, there are lesbians, everyone is well respected, then that's a fantasy, because it did not happen like that in the medieval period, and therefore it's absolutely wrong to expect it of a game that is banking on a sell point that is historical accuracy. Not the game you should choose if you want to see LGBT inclusion. Play something else, or play this game, but accept it as a historical representation of what the medieval period was. The medieval period was not friendly towards LGBT people. That's a reality, and that's a fact. From the article gamesindustry.biz, we read, "Vavra," that's like one of the producers of the game, "there is no propaganda in Kingdom Come Deliverance." Great. Warhorse co-founder says controversy. "If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us. Form the wall. Defend the truth." Of a historical RPG would be laughable if it wasn't serious. Even after the launch of his studio's debut title, Dan Vavra remains on the defensive following criticism over the lack of diversity in Kingdom Come Deliverance. The historical RPG set in the 15th century Bohemia has been criticized for the lack of people of color and the minimal role women play in the story. But developer Warhorse has said always maintained this is in the interest of historical accuracy. Well, here's the thing. As I was saying, if the video game is set in medieval Europe, you cannot start having a bunch of like empowered, socially independent, strong women who muscle their way through medieval Bohemia. It seems like people that have a problem with this, they try to say that, oh, we want to see strong, empowered women that aren't just relegated to the motherly figure, or the figure of the beautiful lady, or the figure of the woman who supports her husband, but that's the medieval period. That's how women were in the medieval period, with only a few exceptions, of course. If that's not what you like, then a historically accurate video game set in medieval Europe might not be the right choice for you. Speaking at Reboot, developed today, co-founder and creative director Vavra disputed the notion that the game might be a vehicle for his own political views. The developer has been associated with Gamergate movement. I'm not familiar with Gamergate movement, so I won't comment on that because I don't know what that is. Often described as a hate group, and has been known to oppose social justice warriors and feminists via social media. Well, here's the thing. I don't know much about Mr. Vavra, but regardless of his own personal politics, as long as his politics are not brought into the game, and for what I could see, they haven't been, then I don't care if the guy is a conservative, as it sounds, or if the guy is a liberal. Clearly not the case, but what I'm trying to say is, if I like a game and there is no political propaganda in it, then I don't care. Like, these people are trying to cancel this guy because he's a conservative. If the guy is a conservative, he's a conservative. As long as his politics are not pushed into the game, it doesn't matter. Likewise, if the game is good, and I come to figure out that, oh look, but the producer of the game, or the guy, the founder, co-founder of the studio, he's a left-wing guy, he's a far leftist, I would approach it the same way. I'd be like, okay, but did he force his politics into the game? No, then I don't care, because it's his freedom to have whatever political position he wants, as long as he doesn't push it into the game. And the fact that they are complaining that he is bashing, I guess, social justice warriors, well, that doesn't really say much, does it? Because so did TJ Kirk, or aka The Amazing Atheist, a few years ago, who was one extreme left-wing YouTuber who was constantly attacking the likes of Anita Sarkeesian. In fact, we could say he's one of the first pioneers of the anti-SJW positioning, and that's fine as long as you're not someone who spreads hate, which I don't think this, I mean, I don't know anything about this guy, and unfortunately I haven't met him when I went to Prague, because I think he was busy, and so we didn't get a chance to see each other, so I can't really speak about him. But regardless of what his politics are, I do not see any politics, and I do not see any hate within the game. So this should be chalked up to his freedom of expression and his freedom of speech and his freedom of political choices, which influence nothing when it comes to the actual game. And in fact, if you try and say, oh, you shouldn't play the game, I've read it, I'm not making this up, this is not a straw man, I've seen people saying you shouldn't buy the game because of his politics. Well, that is cancel culture, and is absolutely wrong, whether you direct it to people who are right-wing or whether you direct it to people who are left-wing. The product is the product. If you like the product is not pushing any political positions, then it's fine. Same could be said about books, same could be said about movies. There you go. He says, I wrote 10% of the game, he clarified. 6 other people wrote it with me. There is an anarchist sitting with me in the office. There are liberal guys sitting with me in the office. There you go. So that kind of clarifies. As far as I'm concerned, that already closes this up. As you can see, the guy has lots of people who clearly peacefully coexist and work together, who are of many different political persuasions, who have contributed significantly to the creation of the game. Besides, when you try and cancel a game, you're also cancelling people such as the graphic artists, the 3D graphics, the expert, the historians. Oh, there is so much work that goes into the production of a game, that trying to cancel it simply because, oh, you disagree with the political take of one of the elements that have to do with the game, unjustly punishes all the rest of the team that now is composed of hundreds of people. And as he says, I have in the same office, we didn't kill each other, we are able to cooperate, so it's ridiculous. I've got to agree with him. They wrote the game, like 90% of it, yeah, I wrote the heart of the main story, but 90% of the actual writing is done by someone else. So even if I wanted, it would be quite tough to force all those people to do something against their will. It doesn't work like that. We have an open, flat-like structure to company, so anybody can tell me to fuck off, basically. Yeah, okay, as far as I'm concerned, that kind of settles it completely. I don't see any politics being pushed in this game, and it's ludicrous that people are accusing it of it because they want to see strong, empowered women, LGBT representation, people of color, and all sorts of ethnic diversity in a game. If you want that sort of representation, then make your own game, set it in medieval Spain so that you can get your diversity, set it in the modern period and you'll see a lot of diversity and representation, because otherwise choose a different setting and then make it, if historically accurate is your thing, or make a fantasy. You know, when the game is a fantasy, it still annoys me if they do it for politics, but at the end of the day, if there is a, creative liberties. I played Dragon's Dogma 2. The very beginning of Dragon's Dogma 2, what I see is a black African dressed like a medieval knight. Do I have a problem with it? No, not necessarily, because it's fantasy. It's a fictional world. So if in this fictional world they want to put a person of every ethnicity everywhere, well, it's fiction, so at the end of the day, you can do it. If you do it for politics, it will still annoy me, and if you change a character that is traditionally a certain way, like for example, if you take Blade and you turn him into a white guy, I'm not gonna like it, because I'm used to Blade being represented by a black actor. Likewise, if you take someone like Goemon from Lupin III, who is Japanese, and you turn him into a white guy, I'm not gonna like it. And the same way, if you take a white character within fiction that has been white this entire time and you turn him into a black character, I'm not gonna like it, simply because I'm sort of connected to that character in the way I remember it. But it's not a big deal because it's fiction. But when it comes to historical accuracy, it is the wrong place to try and force inclusivity. So once again, very much will depend on what city this is set in, but since they do have professional historians, if in said city they only show white Europeans, then it means that historians came to the conclusion, having looked at the sources, not that many by the way, because census in the medieval period, I mean, you do have to go through the churches, archives and annals, but it's not that simple to discuss. But if they do show a generally homogeneous population of white Europeans, it means that that's what the history and the records say. On the other hand, if the specific city that they choose is a strong trading and cultural center, and they do think, hey, we can maybe put a couple of Mongolians and put an embassy from Africa, because these existed. They went to Portugal, they went to Spain in the medieval period where they were trying to ally with European powers against the Muslims, for example. So if something like that is also added and peppered a little bit, and once again it means that it's coming from the historians, I would have nothing against it, as long as they don't do an over representations for the sake of representation at the expenses of historical accuracy. That's when I'm gonna say no. But anyways, this is my position and my idea when it comes to whether Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 should be more inclusive or not. But do let me know what you think, of course, in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.